Welcome back to Yaffee Live, Thursday edition of the show here on Talk Radio 102.3. I'm Tennessee's voice of reason. Joining me on the show right now, he's going to join me every Thursday at this time. Brandon Lewis is the founder of the Tennessee Conservative, joining me right now. Other than that, Brandon, the big topic on the show today is really, we've been talking about illegal immigration and how it's affecting votes nationally. There's a fight in D.C. over the SAVE Act, but there's also some stories here in Tennessee that really have to do with this as well, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. I mean, I know you had one story here where a Chattanooga office of New Americans appears to encourage illegal alien participation in community services. Am I right on that?
As far as we can see, there are meetings that are held by, and this is kind of a clue, by the Department of Equity and Community Engagement. Anytime you hear that word, you typically know it's a left-leaning organization, which includes the Office of New Americans. Now, these are not legal Americans. These are just people that are here on the soil, I suppose. Other partnering organizations such as the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, Bridge Refugee Services, Volunteers in Medicine, etc. And this is all driven by Mayor Tim Kelly's administration with a quote-unquote bridging community series of bi-monthly workshops. And it's essentially a coalition of people that, in my opinion, are likely creating yet one more magnet for legal immigration right here in the Scenic City. And we have had reports. We are the leading news organization reporting on this in the state of Tennessee. We've had reports over and over again for the last 4 years of illegal aliens being bused and flown into Chattanooga. I get reports and pictures all the time. And further, every week we have multiple stories, and if we catch one, there's 10 more that we miss because we don't have the manpower to look into it, where Tennesseans are being raped, murdered, kidnapped, and assaulted by illegal aliens with regularity, like week after week. And so things like this that are coming right to our backyard is concerning.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because a lot of times we think of this on the national level, or we think that the border is just kind of far away from here. Then we hear stories about what's going on in Springfield, Ohio. We've heard stories in Alabama. But you're saying some of that stuff's happening right here, and it really just doesn't get the attention it deserves.
Well, it doesn't, because the media, the left-leaning media, the corporate media, does not want you to know that your interest is not aligned with theirs. And so, a lot of what constitutes the press being fake news, as so often it is called, is the fact that they decide to omit certain stories and to leave out certain parts. And it's amazing. You watch these reports on criminal activity across Tennessee, and they won't even go look for the person's immigration status because, in their opinion, it's a non-issue. It's just another crime. It's not another crime to the victim or the families, but to the folks that are covering this, apparently it is. And so this program that Tim Kelly is pushing, somebody sent in an inquiry to Karen Clay, who's listed as the ONA Neighborhood Relations Specialist, and they asked, is the meeting open to anyone regardless of immigration status? And she said, yes, it is open to any citizens who would like to attend. And I guess her definition of citizen is any person residing in Chattanooga regardless of their immigration status.
Very interesting. Now, Tim Kelly, I talked about that earlier this week, but he's pretty liberal, right? I mean, he says he's nonpartisan, but from what we understand, he's pretty much a liberal Democrat.
I mean, he endorsed Kamala Harris. He mocked the death of Rush Limbaugh, essentially saying he thought it was funny and good. And if you've lived in Chattanooga, I fled Chattanooga to Signal Mountain because the Brainerd neighborhood I lived in got so bad with crime, trash, loitering, littering, panhandling. And despite the complaints, Tim Kelly always turns a deaf ear to quality of life and safety issues, unless, of course, the homeless are encamped on his own private property, in which case he will have the city of Chattanooga remove them so he can sell it. Wow. But aside from that, I've never seen him be very enthusiastic. And you can go to the base of Signal Mountain here, and as soon as you get out of the county and into the city, there's trash, debris. For somebody who is environmentally concerned, it's amazing how much destruction and things that are going all over our city. Our moniker, Yaffee, one of them, which I don't know how long we can keep, used to be the Scenic City. And as you drive through Chattanooga, it is not as scenic as it used to be, and I wish they'd take that a lot more seriously.
Very interesting. Brandon Lewis, he is the founder and publisher with the Tennessee Conservative, which you can read every day at TennesseeConservativeNews.com. Yeah, obviously you would know a lot more about his history than I would, but just the short time I have been here and what I've been able to read and see, it was pretty obvious where Tim Kelly stood. Now, you have another interesting story here this week on your site, talking about how Hamilton County Democrats are publicly admitting to illegal crossover voting. Talk about what's happening here.
Well, it's interesting. I have eyes and ears all over the state, and one of our readers sent me a Reddit post, right? And in this Reddit post, it had screenshots of the early returns between Patsy Hazelwood and Michelle Renault, and there's this long thread of comments where this individual says, I'm a Democrat, and should I have, pulled a Republican ballot instead to vote for Hazelwood? And, you have comments in there that says, in those uncertain terms, here's one of them: I'm a straight ticket Democrat, but pull Republican primary ballots because I believe it offers me the most voice and representation. And then the rest of the comments not only confirm and affirm the voters' actions, but also admit to vote Republican primaries essentially as an attempt to neutralize the conservative candidates. And so we see this happen all over Tennessee. We've seen it happen in Hamilton County before, and crossover voting is a big deal. I've heard that they're going to try to finally, despite killing the bills to stop crossover voting for at least a decade, multiple times by Republicans in Tennessee, that we may or may not have somebody in leadership actually carrying a bill to do just that. And I think a lot of it has been buoyed by Reagan's recent challenge of an election because it turned into a little bit of a black eye.
Yeah, I tend to think you're exactly right on that, but you say it's been buoyed, but what are the good is there still a good chance it passes?
I think there is a better chance than there ever has been because there have been so many public outcries and issues. And something else that I'd like to take a little bit of credit for, we have consistently lambasted and made people in their district aware when Republicans kill this bill as it comes up in various forms in committee. And that is very difficult. That is a really weakens somebody as a GOP candidate if they run against someone else as a challenger that has their act together. Because when you ask people, survey folks that are GOP primary voters, like 98% plus want the primaries closed. They want you to basically just say, hey, which party am I affiliated with, a certain period of time before the election, so that you can't just walk in as you decide every single election, well, am I going to vote like a Democrat this time, or am I going to vote like a Republican? And so there are mechanisms they can put in place, and it's administrative, but if it happens far enough outside of the election, say 90 days, then, you're stuck voting in the primary that you declare, and I think that would virtually eliminate crossover voting because most people won't go to that much effort to register and flop back and forth, but they'll do it in the moment when they reach for the ballot, and so we just need a little bit higher barrier to entry for those who want to break Tennessee law. It's on the books, it's illegal, yet people do it, and it's rarely prosecuted. And in closing, I forwarded this information to Cody Wamp, and she said that in order for her to do anything about it, a complaint has to be filed by a poll watcher or somebody at the election commission, or bring some other evidence. So if anyone knows of any evidence of illegal crossover voting, I would certainly recommend that you send it to DA Cody Wamp's attention and see if we can, make an example of some of these folks that are trying to be disingenuous at the ballot box.
Well, and that's just another reason to pass the law that you're talking about, because you mentioned, well, it's a law to illegally cross over, but it sounds like there's not really a good enforcement mechanism in place to enforce that law. If you have to have someone, a poll watcher, file a complaint, that makes it much more difficult to enforce.
It does, and I think we've had a few votes here. I mean, I could name a lot of representatives, and it wouldn't really matter to most people listening. But Esther Haynes Helton, we had a bill that came up. She's an East Ridge representative in the House, and she did not record as a yes vote on this exact same bill that came through her committee. And I have had people in Republican politics here in town argue with me about Democrats should be able to vote in Republican primaries, and they're almost all like rhino establishment types. And I'm thinking, how disconnected do you have to be from the Republican electorate when 98% say they want it closed, and you're supposed to advocate and represent them, and yet you're advocating for that 1.5% of people who think that should be the case. So it's rather odd, the disconnect.
Well, it sounds like they're more moderate Republicans, too, in general, which is probably why they wouldn't mind Democrats voting in their elections. Am I wrong?
Of course, yeah. But you're not going to get that pride out of the lips of a rhino. Like, that is not coming out of their mouth. They will argue every other reason. The most common reason that you hear is, well, up until a decade ago, 15 years ago, Tennessee was led by the Democrats, and the way that we brought people over was crossover voting. And so now we need to keep crossover voting. I mean, that is the argument you hear. But I'm like, those are, you have different strategies and different tactics for different times. And so for Republicans to advocate for that, essentially leads you to the conclusion of what you just said, which is, moderates want as many Democrats voting in the Republican primary as possible.
Brandon Lewis, he is the founder of the Tennessee Conservative. You can read it every day, TennesseeConservativeNews.com. Of course, he does a podcast every week as well, which you can check on the website, TennesseeConservativeNews.com. Brandon, I appreciate it as always. I know I'll talk to you again next week.
Keep up the good work, buddy. Thanks so much.
Thank you as well.